Hello and welcome to today's Lightroom beginner tutorial. Today I will hopefully be able to bring you Lightroom a little bit closer and show you some of the most important adjustments and also what they can do to your picture by taking a raw file like this and turning it into a photo like this at the end. Alright, so I'm here in Lightroom with my picture and I'm also in the Develop module. Develop is where you're gonna do all of your adjustments and editing, and the other major thing is the Library tool where you're gonna organize and store all of your photos. So let's just choose this picture right here, go to Develop, and in the very top right of the Develop tool you will see a histogram as well as all of the settings you shot this picture at. Now don't worry too much about the histogram, it's not that important just for starting out. Then going down a little bit you will have an array of all of your local adjustments, so all of the adjustments that will just affect a part of the picture rather than the entire photo. However, there is one adjustment here that isn't local, and that is the crop overlay way to the left. Here you could crop your entire picture and make it look something like this, for example, or you could also straighten your horizon by angling the photo differently. In any case, not something I'm gonna do here, so I'm just gonna reset everything. Going down again, you will have all of your global adjustments. All of these adjustments will affect the entire picture, so what I would suggest you to start off with is the basics. And as the name already suggests, this is really a nice starting point for all of your basic needs. So the first option that you actually have here is whether you want to edit a color or a black and white picture, very obvious there. Then going down to the color temperature, when you bring that to the left, your entire picture becomes more cool and more bluish, whereas bringing it to the right will do the exact opposite and make it warmer and more yellowish. A generally good idea here is to keep it looking natural and neutral, so don't go too far into either side, although you could certainly do that for an artistic look. So then the next thing here is the tint, and the main use for tint is if you have, well, a color cast in your picture, you could equate that out by adding magenta if it looks a little bit too greenish, or adding a little bit of green if it looks a little bit too magenta-ish. You could certainly also use that for artistic choices, but I think it's very self-explanatory. With exposure, obviously makes the picture either darker or brighter, and don't be afraid to go into either direction here. If the picture is really too bright, go into the minus. If it's really too dark, go into the plus. Especially if you're shooting RAW, and you should shoot RAW because you get much more information and much better quality at the end, then it won't really do anything bad as long as you go into a reasonable level into the plus or minus. With the contrasts here, you could either make your picture a little bit more poppy. As you can see with the extreme example, it definitely is a quite severe difference. And again, if you're shooting RAW, you will have a relatively flat picture, so going a little bit into the plus can work a lot of the times. Then going down, if you want to adjust your bright portions of the picture but not affect the shadows, you can go to the highlights. And as you see, if I bring that down, just the bright parts get darker, and if I bring that up, just the bright parts get brighter. So here I'm gonna go a little bit into the minus for some additional cloud and highlight detail. Then shadows do the exact same thing, just with the shadows, they just affect the dark and shadow parts and not affect the bright ones. So here I'm just gonna go a little bit into the plus. And going to the whites, this is actually more about the overall dynamic rather than it is really about the exposure adjustment. So if I bring up the whites, as you can see with this extreme example, it makes the entire picture a little bit more punchy, a little bit more alive. So you can't really go too far in every case. I would suggest you to hold down the Alt or CMD key while holding down the white slider as well. And as I bring that to the right, there will come a point where you will get some white areas in your picture. And these white areas indicate blown highlights, which means that certain areas are just completely white, they don't contain any detail anymore. So usually speaking, you want to make sure that you just stop before any of the highlights clip, in this case around +14. Now with the blacks, by bringing them down you can make your dark parts and shadowy areas even more contrasty, or you could of course also bring them up. So in this case I'm gonna bring them down a bit, and I think it really works, especially to dramatize certain elements from 0 to around -40 here. Then clarity will actually, well, as the name suggests, it makes your picture a little bit more crisp and clear, and even though it might work great for this mountain right here, as you can see from 0 to plus, it really brings out these textures and I think it works pretty well. It can also have a bad impact, especially areas such as grass with a lot of contrast and a lot of harsh shadows. If I would bring that up, it would just not really look that great. It would make everything a bit too pronounced. So you have to be careful with that and just kind of find a nice compromise and maybe go into the local adjustments later to add some clarity over just the areas you want them to be in. So I'm gonna go about +30 for the global picture. I think that works pretty well. Then down here you also have Vibrance and Saturation. Now the saturation slider will increase or decrease your overall colors in a very broad way and just kind of choose all of the color and either increase or decrease them. But with the Vibrance slider it will specifically target muted colors that aren't as prominent, and it will increase these weak colors specifically. And you know, every picture is different, so sometimes you will have to increase the vibrance, other times the saturation, sometimes even both. As in this case right here, I'm just gonna bring them both up a little bit. So these were the basics adjustments. I really wanted to go quite in depth here. All of the other adjustments I'm gonna go a bit faster. And with the tonal curve, you can further adjust your levels, your highlight to shadow ratio, and you can even fine tune, you know, kind of the very bright parts of the highlights, as with this slider right here. And some of them are named the same as some of the others in the basics. They don't do the same thing. I really wish Lightroom would name them differently. But for example, the highlight slider in the tonal curve will just increase or decrease the very bright highlights, whereas the highlights in the basics adjustments will increase or decrease the overall and very broad highlights. So kind of a little bit complicated, maybe a bit too much for now. It's really just about the fine tuning and not as much about the rudimentary adjustments, so it's not quite as important. But of course, feel free to play around with it. I'm just gonna leave them out for this video. So going into the Hsl tool, here you can change the individual colors both in hue, saturation and luminance. I'm just gonna take the yellow here as an example. If I go into the hue, especially look at the grass right here, I can change kind of the look at it, and even though if you go crazily like this, it might not work, it can actually work to just fine tune your actual hue and make it really look what you want. And you can also go into the plus here. I could go for kind of a greenish grassy look, but you know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And with the saturation, once again going into the yellow slider, I think that should be fairly obvious. And with the yellows in the luminance, this will decide your luminosity of the color, so whether you want the color to be relatively dark or relatively bright. So at the end, it's a nice fine-tuning thing. You can really make your colors look just the way you want them, but once again, just for the basics, it's not quite as important. So going into the split toning, this is actually a thing that I think is quite important. And the first thing that you have here is highlights. So what you want to do is go to this little box and just click on it, and what it will bring up is this color palette, and here you can just left click on any color and move it around, and it will add colors to your picture. So the thing to be aware of here is that in the highlights it will add colors more towards the highlights than towards the shadows. So if you would, for example, want a little bit more of a warmish, maybe just a bit sunsetty look, you could go here into the orange tones and always adjust your saturation afterwards, because like this it just looks completely fake, but in a lot of cases it can actually work just to add a little bit, you know, 15-20% of orange, and you know, from 0 to about 16, it does make the picture a little bit warmer, especially useful in sunset pictures, not so much in daytime pictures, but you know, you can definitely play around with it. And the shadows, once again, you just want to click on this little box right next to the shadows here, and you can do the exact same thing. Not quite as useful as the highlights though, because naturally speaking, of course, the color comes from the bright sources, so whether that be a sun or the sky or a lamp, it just looks a lot more natural than if you have a ton of color coming from the dark parts. So here you could just go for a little bit of a differentiation if you would want to have the dark tones to be specifically blue, for example. And you know, this might be already a bit advanced, but I think split toning can be very valuable, especially if you're working with a sunrise or sunset picture or something like that. But even in this midday picture, from before any split toning to after, we just added a little bit more interest and a little bit more differentiation from the shadows to the bright parts. Then to the detail. Now detail can have a pretty big effect on the printing and online displaying and so on, and how crisp it looks, but just for the overall look of the picture, the overall colors and brightness and so on, it doesn't do anything. So for this beginner tutorial, I think I'm just gonna leave it out. Then lens corrections, this is actually a great thing and a very simple thing to do. And the first thing you want to do in pretty much all of your pictures is just click on remove chromatic aberration, and just click on it and it's already done. So what this will do is get rid of the purple and green fringing in your picture. So from before here, especially right there, pay close attention to this area right here. From before to after, it just looks so much cleaner, so much better. And you know, it's such a simple thing to do. Then the second thing is to enable profile corrections. You just want to click on it and then choose your lens. In this case, I shot this picture with a Canon 18-55 kit lens. And what this will do is get rid of the distortion, so from before to after it just looks more straight. And it will also get rid of the lens vignetting, so all of the dark corners. Just click on it on both of these. It's just a thing of 10 seconds. It's super easy, super fast, and the effect is definitely noticeable. Then going down into the transform tool, this is mainly for architecture, so if you really need some lines to be straight, you could straighten them here. But in most pictures, even in city pictures, but certainly landscapes, there's just no use for it. And especially if you're just starting with Lightroom, don't even worry about it, just move on, it's not a big deal, believe me. So going down into the effects, now the only thing that I really think is important here in the effects is the post-crop vignetting. And if I would bring that down, I would actually make the corners of my image darker. If you do that, now you don't want to really do it that much, but I'm just going to keep it at -100 for the sake of showing you all of the other sliders. So you want to bring the midpoint more towards the center, just to make the vignetting a little bit more prominent, less cut off. And you probably also want to bring up the feather, so the distinguishment from the dark corners to the actual picture is much less. So going into a more feasible level, of course -100 is crazy. You know, in a lot of cases actually just about -15, -10 can really work. And I think I'm gonna leave it at around, yeah, -13 here. From before any vignetting to after, maybe I even bring the midpoint more towards the center. And it just makes your picture a little bit more dramatic, it gets more attention towards the center, less towards the edges. And it's a very subtle thing. It can help your picture, but it's not needed in every single one. Just try it out for yourself, and if it works, then great. So going into the last global adjustment, we're already there. Wasn't too long, I hope. But here what you have is first of all profile as well as the primary colors. Now this is kind of advanced a little bit. So with the profiles, this is by the way also a thing that you will only have the option to change if you're working with a RAW file. So a small additional benefit to shooting RAW. But what you have here is a bunch of camera profiles, and if I go to one, you will be able to see that the color as well the exposure and just kind of your overall picture style changes. Now you will have to go through all of them with every picture that you shoot to really see which one works best, because there's no real set tactic, just go through all of them and see what you like best. But here I think I'm actually going to go with camera neutral. It seems to work a bit more, naturally. It looks a bit more natural than Adobe standard here, especially in the sky. And then down with the primary colors. Now here it gets a little bit complicated, because if I move around the blue hue to the minus, it will actually also adjust the greens and the reds. So once again, for this beginner tutorial, I'm just gonna leave that out. And with that being said, I think we're done with the global adjustments. Now, I know that there are a lot more sliders, a lot more tools and effects and, combinations of sliders to get the perfect effect at the end. But my goal here was to show you the most impact heavy adjustments, the ones that I really think are the most important ones, and show you what they do on an actual picture. So I hope that was helpful in that regard. But I do want to cover the local adjustments real quick. So once again, the local adjustments are all up here. And I'm going to start off with the adjustment brush. And these things right here, I'm actually just going to remove all of the other ones. So what you see right here is what you can change with either the adjustment brush, the Radial filter, or the graduated filter. It's not quite as extensive as the global adjustments. For example, you cannot change the camera calibration or Hsl Tool just for the adjustment brush. So this is really all you have that you see right here on screen. But regardless, the adjustment brush is great if you want to brush over an area and just adjust, a certain part of your picture. Now down here you have the main features, so size. If I just go into the minus exposure to show you that, obviously bigger size is bigger adjustment brush, so make sure it's as big as you want it to be. Then feather is how soft the graduation of your effect to the rest of the picture is. So here with the feather at 100, even this crazy minus exposure dot looks to be gradually going into the rest of the picture, whereas I would go into the 0 feather, it would literally just be a round dot. So I would suggest you do bring up the feather at least a little bit. I usually keep it always at 100. Then flow is, well, it's kind of how your flow works, how your effect looks. So I would suggest you to keep that at 100 as well. Certainly can't do anything wrong with that. And auto mask is another very important thing, because a lot of people will just keep that on. And if you keep that on and draw over an area, then Lightroom will try to decide which you want to be selected for the adjustment. So once again, with the crazy minus exposure, you can really see what kind of terrible job it does. So even though it can be theoretically useful, in practice it's usually nothing that I want to use, so be sure to check that off. Now the density is last. I honestly just keep that at 100 because I just changed the adjustments with it, but if I would make a stroke with -4 exposure and 100 density here, it looks very, severe, and going into about 20 density with the exact same settings otherwise, it just doesn't look as severe because it's only 20% of the full adjustment. So, you can use that. You can also just go into the exposure itself and not go quite as far into the minus. It's really up to you. And what I actually want to do here with the adjustment brush is go a bit into the plus shadows, plus exposure, minus contrast, as well as minus clarity, and brush over this area right here and just make it a little bit brighter. Now, as you can see, it's a little bit over the top, so I'm just going to fine tune all of these sliders again. And I think that works a lot better compared from before to after. So use the adjustment brush for any local adjustments that you want to brush over, maybe some additional vignetting. The possibilities are really endless. And with the radial filters, these are actually very similar to the adjustment brush. You can also adjust a certain area of your picture, but here you can't brush over an area. You can just either add a round filter. I'm just gonna go once again into the minus crazy exposures. You see what I do here. So you can either add a round filter or an ellipse shape filter. And this is great for dodge and burning, which is making individual parts of your picture either darker or brighter for additional complexification in the lighting. It's kind of an advanced thing, so I'm not gonna go over it at all, because if I do, it will just be way too much if you're just starting out with Lightroom. But you know, you can also do certain local adjustments there that you think works a little bit better than with the adjustment brush. And the graduated filters, once again, you have the exact same settings that you can choose from, but here you can just add an adjustment over the entire side of the picture. Now you can angle it however you want, you can move it around, you can have a very soft edge, you can have a very harsh edge, it's all up to you. But that is great for very large adjustments such as the sky. If, for example, the entire sky is too bright, then you could just grab an adjustment brush, drag it over the sky, and go into the minus exposure and fix it that way, but I think the sky is just fine how it is. And you can do some more advanced things as closing out your picture or adding additional differentiation in the lighting. But again, a simple way to use it would be to drag it over the sky and decreasing the exposure. Alright, so then to the next and last two local adjustments, the red eye correction. This is for portraits. If you have someone with a red eye, you can correct it that way. And more importantly, in my opinion, is the spot removal tool. With that, you can remove actually a spot. For example, if I show you this right here, now I don't mind that, but let's just say it's an ugly sensor spot or dust spot, dirt spot, I just can remove it that way, and Lightroom tries to fill it with another area that fits it in a nice and natural way. So for that, just be sure to be on Hsl, make sure your opacity is at 100, your feather is somewhere in the middle, and your size is according to the object you want to remove. Again, removing dust, dirt spots, unwanted objects, and even unwanted people, although be sure to only do the last thing within Lightroom. So with that being said, let's take a look at the final picture, because I think I'm gonna end it here. So let's take a look at a raw file, and this is a raw file, looks a lot more flat, less punchy, and afterwards, even after just these few adjustments, I've already got this picture right here, and it could certainly benefit from more things, fine-tuning, dodge burning, but this video was really all about the basics, and I hope I could make it easy to follow along. And the thing that I would really appreciate is if you could take a quick second to leave either a like or a dislike. Just be completely honest here, it helps me to see whether you've actually enjoyed the video and found it helpful or not. And with it also helps to improve my future videos. So in any case, thank you very much for watching, thank you very much for sticking around so long, keep on editing great pictures and take care.